Hey guys, welcome to Mrs. G Sewing Space. So I told you we were going to do separate videos, and we are. So this is the first one. So this is going to be the first pencil roll that we make. Now the way we make the other ones are very similar. There's nothing major differently. There are some different techniques, like when you add the flaps, but this will be the first one because it's the simplest and the best way to get it put together. Now, as I said, this one is just a piece of elastic that I just flip over like this. It's sewn into one short edge. It doesn't matter what side, it just needs to go in the middle of the short edge, so when you roll it up it can flip over on itself. I have the 1-inch pockets here for each of the individual pencils or crayons or whatever, and then I have a big pocket in this one, and the other ones I sewed down the middle and did 2 smaller pockets for erasers, for markers, for loose change, whatever. So this one is made out of an outdoor fabric. It's very stiff. It's and I know when you start to use it, it'll loosen up, but it's I want to say polyester, but it could be some other chemical name. It's a plastic, pretty much. I don't think there's any cotton, any natural fiber in here, which is why it can withstand the outdoors, but it's also thicker. It ended up being easier and harder to sew at the same time because you have so many thicknesses, like right here in the corners or in your seams, but it ended up being a loose weave, which made it easier, but you still have all that thickness. So I wouldn't use this again. And my original thought in using this was I wanted something sturdy to withstand use, and I believe it will. I mean, it's made out of plastic, but I just don't think that, I think it's too thick. I think it's too, yeah, just too thick, because you have multiple layers in here. So it's like you have one layer of fabric here, one layer of fabric here. This piece would be folded over in half, so that ends up being 2 layers. So that's 4 layers right here. And then you have on your corners where you're folding things over. Yeah, it's a lot of layers. As we move on to the video, I'm going to explain everything and how I sewed it all together, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to click that like button, hit that share button, hit the subscribe button, do all the things to help share my video and show your love for the things that I'm teaching. I appreciate it. The algorithm will appreciate it. I appreciate it, and it gets my videos out there so more people can see them. So I'll see you at the end. Here you can see we have our 3 main pieces already cut out. So we have our main body piece, which was cut in a fold, our pocket piece for our pencils cut on a fold, and then the extra little pocket piece that was also cut on a fold. So at this point I'm going to take the pocket piece for our individual pencils. I'm going to make sure all the edges are lined up properly, and I'm going to sew either one short side, or if I cut out 2 individual pieces, then I'm going to sew the one long edge and one short edge. Now that I have my piece sewn together, I'm going to flip it so the raw seams are on the inside. But I'm going to make sure I take care of that corner first. I'm going to trim that corner to reduce the bulk so that when I flip it, it won't be super thick when it's time to sew it onto the body of the bag. To help manipulate that fabric into the corner, I'm using the dull side of a pin, the cap. So just push that fabric into the corner to make it a sharp corner. Now I'm lining up everything, and because I cut this on a fold, I'm lining up my bottom edges so that they're even, and then I'm just going to finger press everything flat so that it lies in one nice long flat piece. You can see here that I'm using some pins just to keep the bottom together. I don't want things shifting as I'm trying to lay it on the body piece or when I sew it together. This next part is where I'm using a ruler to mark 1-inch segments for the pockets of the individual pencils. Now, I would recommend using something that will disappear, a disappearing ink, air dry ink, and not a Sharpie marker. I did this so that you guys can see what I'm doing, but this is permanent ink, so I would not recommend using this on something that you wanted to keep to present to somebody or something for yourself. Use something that disappears. Now I took this piece to the sewing machine, and using those dots as guidelines, I sewed from the folded edge to the cut edge. Now the reason that I did that was for 2 reasons. It keeps the entire piece together so none of the fabric will shift, and also the lines that I sewed also act as guidelines. So when I add the pocket to the body piece, I'll just sew right over those guidelines and create my pockets that way. So you can see I've taken that pocket piece and I'm lining up the raw edges into that corner, making sure everything lines up, and I'm going to sew directly on top of the basting lines I sewed earlier, cleaning up the edges and the corners, trimming all those threads, and then testing out the pockets, make sure all my pencils and pins fit. Now I'm taking the secondary pocket, doing the exact same thing, sewing 3 sides, right sides together, trimming the edges and the corners, looping it out, using a pin because of that dull point, and poking out the corners and the seams to make sure everything lies flat so it can be sewn on, and finger pressing all my edges so that they all lie nice and neat. Now that I got my pocket situated, I'm putting it on the main body. I'm lining up the cut raw edges against that body and sewing down the left side and the right side. So we have an opening at the top and the raw edges at the bottom. Now I'm adding on the back piece. So the back piece goes right sides together to the front piece. So the pockets are hidden on the inside. You can see here I'm pinning the front to the back, I'm matching up my corners, and I'm cleaning up the edges. Once I have all my pins in place, after the edges are clean, I am then going to sew across the top and the bottom. I'm leaving the short edges open because now we're going to figure out how much elastic we need to wrap around the roll. So I just sewed the top and the bottom. The sides are still open, and I'm going to roll the wrap up and test it out with a piece of elastic. I'm just going to wrap it around it and take a kind of a guesstimate. At this point, I'm going to choose a side and I'm going to sew a loop of elastic, so the 2 cut ends into the middle of one of the sides. I'm tucking the loop to the inside, so the cut edges of the elastic are going to poke out so that I can sew them securely down. When we flip everything inside out, the loop will be on the outside. Now that I've sewn up the shorter edges, I did leave a gap in one short end so that we can flip everything inside out. But I'm going to take this time to reduce the bulk wherever I can. So I'm trimming out the seam allowance where the pockets are. I'm going to try to take out any extra fabric there. I'm going to trim the corners, and anywhere else that I can thin out the fabric without damaging the sewing. Now at this point I'm flipping it inside out from the hole that I left. Flipping things inside out, trimming the corners again, and just working the fabric. Fabric will not break, so if you need to squish it through a hole and work it through. And I'm going to take my pencil or chopstick or whatever and just work out those corners, work out the seam allowances so everything is pulled through and nice and flat. Finger pressing all the way. So this is where I'm tucking in the raw edges and trying to get the seam to match where we flipped everything inside out. So this is the hole where I flipped everything inside out, tucking in those raw edges, pinning it shut, and trying to make it look as if there was no hole there at all. So this just takes finagling and a little patience to get everything looking nice, so when we sew all the way around and it sews our seam allowances down, that hole will be closed up as well. At this point I'm doing a final finger press. I'm just pressing the seam allowances down and I'm putting pins in to hold it in place, because I'm then going to do a final stitching around the entire bag, sewing down those seam allowances so that they don't shift and move or anything like that. When I sew across the elastic, I'm going to make sure I take the time to reinforce where it is sewn in at, so that use will not tear the elastic from the seam allowance. That would really stink. So here it is. I've taken the time to sew all the way around the fabric on the edges, securing everything in place. I'm now adding my pencils and rolling everything up, and I have that extra pocket for any type of erasers, paper, or whatever else you want to throw in there. As I rolled this one up, I found the elastic was a bit too big, so I just tied a knot in the end to tighten it up, and that works for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba